That is so awesome. This thing is a crossbow that shoots like a shotgun. And that is a lot of fun. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Twang and Bang. When Zubin Outdoors contacted me to test out this crossbow and they explained what it did, I could not wait to get my hands on it. Fans of the channel know that I tend to geek out about ideas that are different. I don't care if they're practical or not. That doesn't matter to me. I really like seeing a designer come up with a completely different idea and take a risk bringing it to market. And that's what Zubin Outdoors did with the X340. It's a crossbow that shoots not only arrows, but it also shoots these sabots filled with lead shot. And it happens to do both really well at a budget price. And that's why the X340s was coming up next on Twang and Bang. The Zubin X340 is like no other crossbow that I know of. It shoots arrows, of course, but it also shoots sabots that you can load with shot pellets. That's why Zubin makes a claim that the X340 is the world's most versatile crossbow. The name comes from its 340 feet per second rated speed with the included 370 grain Black Eagle arrows. The X340 split limbs have a peak draw weight of 170 pounds and a 13.5-inch power stroke. The most notable feature is that instead of an open top rail, the X340 has a true barrel with cuts for arrow vanes as well as the sabots. The string itself runs right through the middle of the barrel with no need for the serving wearing downward pressure required by traditional rails. The cables are also yoked to pass over and under the barrel for even pressure on the limbs. This means that the limbs flex with minimal torsion, which should reduce both vibration and noise at the shot. The trigger is single stage and non-adjustable. The safety automatically engages when the latch engages the string, though there's no anti-dry fire mechanism, so you must pay attention when loading to protect yourself and the bow. The forend is quite beefy, with large guards to keep your fingers out of the path of the string. This and the barrel design contribute to the X340's 7.5 pound weight, which isn't as heavy as some crossbows out there, but it is noticeable in the hand. The X340 is sold as a package complete with a TrueGlow 4x32 illuminated scope and rings, 6 Black Eagle arrows, a 3-arrow quiver, cocking rope, and 10 preloaded sabots. The sabots are translucent orange so you can see if they are loaded when closed while making them easier to find on the ground when fired. 16 pellets of BB shot are held fairly securely by the shot channel, making loading shot into the sabots easier than I expected. An O-ring holds the two halves together until you are ready to load. You must remove the O-ring for the sabot to work, though you won't get the O-ring past the end of the barrel anyway, giving you a good reminder to do so. Additional sabots are available in packs of 12 for under $8 from dealers, and the street price on the Zubin X340 is under $550. Though the X340 has a 170 pound peak draw, that peak is only for a very brief part of the power stroke. It actually draws like your typical compound bow. It starts easy, gets hard, and at the very end, the cams flip over and make it very easy for you to get the string into the latch. And that last little bit of pull actually sets the latch and sets the auto safety. Because it's got a full barrel to it, you can't use a conventional sled, so you have to use cocking rope with hooks. There's a notch in the stock, get the hooks on either side, get them close to the barrel, and these things tend to be self-centering. But there was really no effort to that. I've had a harder time drawing crossbows with a much lighter peak draw weight, and it has to do with the cams. With practice, loading an arrow is actually pretty easy. You just use the nock to find the hole in the barrel. The cock vane goes to the left, and wiggling it will help you find the slots in the barrel. And slide it on back. You'll feel a little resistance push past that resistance. You'll go another inch until the flat nock is against the string, and it's loaded. It's that easy. That's awesome. This is not a $1,000 crossbow. This is not a $1,500 crossbow. This is a budget crossbow, so it does have a budget feel to the safety. It's a little bit difficult to get from safe to fire. And the trigger it's got a pretty decent pull to it. But that doesn't seem to get in the way of accuracy. I mean, I'm shooting 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch groups, 5 shots at 25 yards. That's well beyond what you need to be able to hunt. And so I'm happy with what's happening at the target end. I'm not so much worried about what's happening here, given the price. If this were a much more expensive bow, I'd have more to say about this. But given this price range, I'm not worried about it at all. Loading a Sabot and an X340 is my big complaint about it, because it pushes my bounds of what I feel is a safe thing to do. And let me explain. The instructions tell you in order to load a Sabot into the barrel, of course you have to pull the O-ring off of the end. The bow has to be cocked, of course, and then you stick it in the end of the barrel and then let go. But invariably, friction stops it somewhere. The gravity alone isn't enough to take it all the way down, and it must be touching the string in order for you to safely fire it. Otherwise, you end up with what would be a dry fire situation, and it can blow up the whole bow. And I'm wearing safety glasses in part because if something were to go wrong with the latch right now, my face is in proximity to parts that might fly off. So I suggest you use safety glasses when you load a Sabot regardless. But that gets down to the safety issue, because I'm one of the few people, it's extremely, extremely rare for there to be a latch failure where the latch lets go of the string without you touching the trigger. I've never had it happen with this bow. I have had it happen with one bow, and my experience triggered a recall of that bow to fix the latch. But the fact that with this cocked, it could go off at any time means that no matter how you get the Sabot from there to there, you're gonna be putting a body part at risk. Number one, do not reach in there with your finger and slide the Sabot back, because that is the most dangerous thing you could do, is put any body part inside the path of that string. You will get a severe, severe injury, potentially amputation of fingers, if your hand is in the way and this were to go off. So what I use is the arrow as a ramrod, and I'm able to find the end of the barrel and slide it on back and push it all the way and have it seat against the string. That looked pretty easy, right? And for the most part, my hand was out of the way of the center of the Sabot. But remember, the Sabot is about that wide at the side. So when I have my fingers closed around my ramrod here, they're actually in the way. If this were to fire and the arrow being pushed through my fingers wasn't enough to get my fingers out of the way in time, the Sabot could come crashing into my fingers. This is a very, very, very low probability event, but it is a safety issue that you need to keep in mind before you commit to buying something like this and then loading a Sabot. The risk is not zero. There is a risk there. But if you load it the way I showed, I think that you minimize the risk, certainly compared to other ways that you might be tempted to get that Sabot all the way up against a string.
The color looks funny here because I had to adjust it so you could see the Sabot pieces in flight. The design causes the Sabot to split immediately after leaving the barrel, and you can see here that the halves are already starting off in separate paths only a few yards out. By 10 yards, the halves are already several feet apart and spreading rapidly, and by 25 yards, one half hit the dirt in front of the target and the other sailed over the fence. So is a Sabot effective at keeping the shot on target? I'm going to pattern the X340 to find out.
Oh, man. Wow, that's pretty awesome. That's fun every time, man. Okay, we got some more spread. There's where at least one of the Sabots punched through. But the crosshairs were right here. May have drifted a little bit to the left when I pulled the trigger.
Whoa, that still hits really hard. Let's take a look at that. So here's 8 yards. Yes, and I know what this looks like. I drew 2 of these. You'll see the next one. But I was aiming right here using my 25-yard hole for the arrows. And yeah, that's a dead squirrel. You can imagine this being roughly the size of the head of a squirrel. And that took that squirrel right out. Don't forget the sabot whacked into this at 340 feet per second, or pretty close to it. And so that's about like getting hit by a rock, a 340 grain rock, or a 375 grain rock. This is what I got at 16 yards. And again, I was aiming right here. You could see once again the shot spread kind of in a line, not quite fully horizontal. But that's the entire shot pattern right there. And so if you zeroed for it, again, that's gonna be a dead squirrel. You make a headshot with that. That's pretty impressive. Now here is 25 yards. And again, let's say that this is the head of a squirrel and that's where you're aiming at. That's where my crosshairs were. Very precisely, I was shooting off of this bench here. And that's a number of pellets right there. 1 pellet there. And got quite a spread around. I'm gonna have to run the kinetic energy calculation on these pellets. So, you know, they're lead. This isn't like a steel BB. These are going to hold a lot more kinetic energy than a steel BB. But that's actually really impressive. That's it. Those are every pellet is accounted for in this target right here at 25 yards. I was not expecting that. That is really cool. To me, the X340 has a whole lot going for it. Clearly, it would perform very well on a range, right? You can drill a target with this crossbow. It's a lot of fun shooting the shot with the sabots, although you are responsible for deciding what you're comfortable with safety-wise. I pointed out the issues with the safety with loading, but if you're okay with the risks that you need to take in loading, it is a lot of fun. It does exactly what they promise. I do have a number of recommendations. Number 1, you get 6 arrows in the package. These are good arrows to get you started, but the 22-inch length is just, it's too short for safe use with broadheads, in my opinion, because the barrel runs to about there. And so when you're loading, if you have broadheads on that reflex over the shaft, like my favorite Ceramcats, they actually don't go all the way and seat against the string. Even if you're not using Ramcat, something that reflexes over the shaft, your fingers are going to be right there around the blades of your broadhead if it's a standard broadhead. And I'd prefer a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more cushion of safety. So I would recommend contacting Black Eagle, tell them you've got an X340 and you want 24-inch arrows to go with it. And that'll give you what you need, and it really isn't going to cost you speed. So if you're going to put broadheads, I recommend 24-inch arrows. The second recommendation is right here. This section of rail right here, the sole purpose is really to be a mounting point for the quiver, and it works really well for that. But if it's going to be a specification that looks like it could accept bipods, weapon lights, and camera mounts, it should be Picatinny, but it's not. In order to save costs, which makes sense, this is actually an off-the-shelf Weaver scope rail. And again, it works perfectly as it's designed, which is to be a mount for the quiver. But I've already talked to the manufacturer and I suggested that they find a similar source of actual Picatinny spec rail, because then it will add additional benefit, because then you could mount a bipod there that has a Picatinny mount. You can mount a weapon light. You can mount a camera that's Picatinny spec, because none of those are going to be found in Weaver specification. This is designed for scope rings, and that's pretty much it. But I don't hold that against them, because they're not selling this rail as an accessory rail. It is simply a mounting point for the quiver, and it does that. And there are very few crossbows out there on the market that have any kind of rail whatsoever on them. So I don't really hold that against them, but I think it's a recommendation that hopefully they'll take to heart, and you'll start to see these with Picatinny spec. The last thing is, when it comes to actually using it to hunt something like squirrels, the kinetic energy is enough to kill a squirrel at close range. And yes, you could get close to squirrels. They could be sitting in a tree and you can pop them out of a tree. Or there are times where they will just be worried more about your bird feeder than you walking up to them. But my preference at any kind of distance is something with more kinetic energy than this is going to generate, because these start at 340 feet per second. Which is fast for an arrow, but it's not that fast for a pellet at all. That's over 100 yards distance out of a 12 gauge, shooting a magnum load with BBs, like a turkey load. So there's not a lot of kinetic energy there. I think to humanely take something like a squirrel, to my preference, I would do it in a heartbeat if it were a stuff hits the fan kind of situation. No question. And then when you get to that, one of the cool things I really like about these sabots is they are super easy to find. Even though you might take some time, I have no problems finding these, and they're super tough. These things have smacked into the wood frame of my target box, and they just bounce right off. There are no cracks or whatever. So you just have to buy a bag of lead BB shot. I recommend finding lead BB shot rather than using steel BBs that you would use for a BB gun, and roll your own, load your own. So this gives me a lot to talk about, but from the start I thought it was a really cool idea and I wasn't disappointed. If you want to learn more about the X340, be sure to click the link in the video description. It'll take you to my full written review on my website. You could also find it at TWANGnBANG.net. Be sure to follow me at Instagram and Facebook to see what I'm doing in between videos. And be sure to click here to subscribe so you can see my next videos on bows, guns, and other cool stuff. I really appreciate you watching Twang and Bang, and hope to see you next time.